Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Ramesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Ramesh and I met while I was supporting a client transforming their business, and I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest episode with today's special guest, Sid Vasili. Sid is a very successful entrepreneur and businessman, but started his career with very humble beginnings. As we very recently found out, he began as an apprentice ladies hairdresser, but from that humble yet fulfilling start, I'm sure, Sid moved on to start his first enterprise back in 1976, and has since built and sold a number of global businesses. Sid is now an investor who mentors and guides founders and their teams. Hi Sid, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Very well, Ramesh. Nice to see you, and nice to see you as well, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Sid.
You will.
Yeah. So Sid, you've built so much experience over the years. I got a real sense of this when we worked together on a project at QLM Watches. You've got a passion for Swiss watches, and we were helping out a mutual, very good friend, Matthew Kuehl, on that project. And I really did see you demonstrate, that level of expertise that you'd gained over those years. I'd love to start at the beginning, post hairdressing. Can you tell us about how you built your first business?
Well, yes. Hairdressing was a great foundation for me. It helped me with my communication skills, especially speaking to young ladies about how they wanted to evolve their look and so on and so forth. And so after the great hairdressing journey, everybody uses the term journey, but I'm not entirely sure whether journey is the right word. I then started getting involved in the business equipment field, and I got my first real role where I considered there was a platform for my future growth. The company called 3M, who you may or may not have heard of. That was back in 1974, and my job was to encourage corporates to actually use microfilm systems to store their long-term documents in a microfilm archive, as opposed to in boxes of paper and filing cabinets in warehouses all over the world. And so that was a really interesting pivot for me, because I was more involved in consumer type environments, and when I went into 3M, it was then very much into a corporate space and learning a new language. And it wasn't about curls and color, it was about outcomes and dynamics and how to store all this stuff, right? And I was talking to a very good customer of mine. I just sold him a very, very large microfilm system, which gave me a big tick in the box from 3M's perspective. And he said to me, "This is great stuff, Sid. I really enjoy this. It's delivering all the benefits I need. But can you find somebody to run this thing for me, purely on the basis that I can't motivate my staff sufficiently to get this stuff done? And I've got delivery notes coming out of my ears and coming out all over the shelves all over the place, and I can't actually address my customers' requirements." So I just said to him, "Well, John, why don't I do it for you?" He said, "Oh, great. Can you start next week?" So that's how it started. And I went to, I was feeling good about that. I thought, "Oh, Jiminy Cricket, how am I going to do that?" I wanted to speak to my boss at 3M. And I said, look, Dave, you've been very, very helpful to me, but I've just made a commitment to a customer of ours to actually run a microfilm bureau to actually capture all his documents. He said, oh, great stuff. I said, I'll lend you some equipment, go off and do it, work your notice out and get on with it. And that's how the business started. It was a very,
That's amazing. He supported you in that way. That's brilliant.
Totally. Dave was a realist because I think because I did reasonably well from a sales perspective and drove his numbers up. He was very, very grateful, and he loaned me some equipment to start the original business called HMSL, Hertfordshire Microfilm Services Limited, and a lot of microfilm and some equipment and some bits and pieces. And he said, well, when you make some money, pay us back, which was
Did you always want to be an entrepreneur, Sid? Was that always your ambition, or did it happen by this serendipitous moment?
Well, my dad had run his businesses. He'd run cafes and restaurants and snack bars, and even from the age of 5, I was working with helping or annoying my granddad, who was running the kitchens in the place. And I got to understand and how to talk to people, and even to the extent when I was 6 years old, I was serving tables. So it's and customers were really very, very nice and very, very tolerant, and I dropped a few plates and tripped over a few things, and that sort of got me into thinking, well, this is quite an interesting business, because my dad was growing these. He had 14 shops at one time, and then it sort of up, and I thought, well, what a great idea. And it was always in the back of my mind. And during the apprentice ladies hairdressing phase, I was continually talking to these wonderful customers that we had and upselling them to wigs and hair pieces and so on and so forth. So it almost drove that entrepreneurial thing from for me working for somebody. And then, of course, when I got the opportunity that John Hallam's presented me at CBS, I thought, well, why not? Let's just have a go. And that really sparked the whole thing off. And that was really great, because what I had to do is almost overnight fit up a workshop in my garage at home, get a load of equipment in there, and also some folks to help me process these documents onto microfilm. So it was just like a bit of a whirlwind, and that worked extremely well. And I managed to pay 3M back, which was really quite nice. They were really pleased and became an essential supplier to myself. And then they said, well, look, we've got a load of customers out there that we think you should go and visit and see if you can help upsell their capabilities. So that's what I did.
It was a true win-win.
It really was, because I was using plenty of gear, using a lot of their equipment and consumables and everything else, and growing the business, and also enhancing their reputation of the ability to be able to do one part of the process and take all of the headache of processing documents away from their customers. And so that sort of elevated and grew. So William Press became a customer of ours, a large civil engineering company. WEA Records was the second record company. Then I picked up a few more record companies. Everybody had exactly the same problem. They needed to find stuff quickly so they could respond to their customers. And so we developed a solution that would allow that to happen.
That's amazing.
And so that's how it all sort of kicked off.
Going back, Sid, to the inspiration and your experiences, as you were growing up, it seems to me that there's definitely a trend there. And Mike, I'd love to get your views on this as well. That if you grow up observing people being entrepreneurs, it kind of takes away some barriers and kind of encourages you to pursue that. And I think that's why a lot of people who aren't in that space or who haven't grown up in that space find that more of a challenge. Sid, was that was massively helpful to you, right? And Mike, do you feel that that is something that has maybe been in your family history or something you've observed more widely?
my thinking is Sid will have experienced the risk that his dad will have been through and how he'll manage it, and his family risks and the kind of risks that you have to take as an entrepreneur and how you can learn from it and push through and succeed. I'm from a very traditional sort of teacher background. It took me a lot longer to take that big leap into setting up my own business and doing entrepreneurship because of that risk factor, I think. And I think that I would say that constrained my understanding. I always talk about, I assumed entrepreneurship meant I had a vision, I knew what I was going to do, I had funding, I had a plan. And I've since learned that is just wrong. And I didn't have that upbringing to give me that kind of education.
No, absolutely. I'm very much the same. You know, very, very traditional kind of go through the career path, and it was the perception of risk, I suppose, that made me certainly not even consider it at the beginning. So it's really, really interesting, Sid, to hear, you know, how that upbringing really informed you and gave you that confidence and ability to thrive, you know, from the beginning. So that's excellent. I'm sure when you set up that first business, and it sounded like, you know, it was a wild success, really, you know, and you kind of learned as you went. You've obviously gone on to build other businesses, but I'm sure there are key learnings from that first business with the challenges you had to overcome that replicate with everything else you've done since then. You know, is that the case?
Well, I think so. I mean, from waiting tables at six years of age and learning to talk to people and going through all of those processes, what you learn to do is to listen intently to what people say. You try and interpret those elements in a particular manner inside your head, right? And I think that what I did learn when I was young is the conversation is critical. Good manners is very critical. The ability to listen intently is critical. And so when you do evolve your own business, you're conscious all of the time to ensure, number one, you're delivering exceptional service. Number two, you're listening to your customers. Number three, you're enhancing your service based on customer needs. Or you have a vision to think about something that potentially could make their life a lot easier. So it's a mix of elements. And so that when you know, with CBS Records microfilming all of their dispatch notes all the way through to the other companies, and then finding they've got storage issues with their microfilm, then also listening to saying, well, look, it's all very nice and handy having all these rolls of film, but our big problem is that we have such a great turnover of staff that we need a centralized sort of card index system so that we can look for stuff on the cards and then go and find a roll of film that contains this stuff. So then, in those days, we had those things called IBM ATs and XTs, Charlie. You may remember those things. I thought, well, if we could actually build a database that just records all of the dispatch notes and where they position, what roll of film they were on and which frame position, then that'll make their life a bit easier. So what we then did, I then went around the market and found a guy in Johannesburg, would you believe? I mean, it's you know, don't keep it local, but you know, spread your wings. And I found that he had a really interesting solution called Carfile. And essentially what they did, it just as a database that recorded image numbers and rolls of film and document numbers. And so we brought that into the UK, and that exploded, and that changed the entire process that we were in to make life much easier for our customers. And that was the whole thought process. You know,
did you ever at any point realize you'd been successful? Was there a kind of moment when you'd realize this was really working, or was it just, I know you didn't like the word journey, but it's just a journey you were on, you were doing what you felt was right, you were listening to what customers needed, you were selling new things?
I think that the latter, you know, I was just doing stuff. I wasn't thinking about me being, you know, successful. It was just about making sure that we could deliver the best that we possibly could for our customers and that the business would grow. I wasn't looking for an exponential growth. I was looking for a gentle growth pattern. And as soon as we introduced Carfile into the system, Then we found the large microfilm companies that were actually manufacturing this equipment were coming to me and asking, could they resell this computerized index package, because it would make their life easier for their customers. And so that sort of evolved. And then continuing to listen to the customers and evolving the services is really what it's all about. And it was not about patting myself on the shoulder. It was just saying, come on, let's make sure the customer gets what they want.
You talk all the time in the lens of a customer. And now I'm going to pick up on a word you mentioned a couple of times, listening. Is that one of the key things that you see as a massive factor in the success that you've had on your journey of creating all these companies and the success you've had?
Well, I think listening is critical. Listening and then trying to interpret and understand what they really mean. And if you don't understand what they mean, ask the question. Because it's an open conversation, and I think that helps enormously. And of course, as their businesses evolved, they're all evolved about listening to needs and requirements and everything else. Not saying Vasily's my name, selling's my game, I've got this right spot, you stop me and buy one. That was not what it was all about. It was just making a due consideration of really what the customers actually needed, and also pivoting their thinking somewhat, not exponentially, into thinking things could be better. And so and that's how the business evolved, and that business grew quite substantially. And we had with, as Ramesh knows, a good friend of ours is Matthew Kuehl. And Matthew had a processing center in Harbin in China, where he was actually capturing documents born on behalf of other folks. I got to hear about it. I met him at an exhibition, and I just said to him, well, Matthew, could you help me? So we started streaming images out to Matthew. And he would capture all the information so we could actually build scale into our model. And that's how that business evolved. Again, because our customers were being ever more demanding, and I just couldn't work within our own little footprint. So I needed external help. I then found somebody else in India that could also do the same. And so that what I did is because the Chinese were very, very good at capturing numerics, we used to split the documents into alpha for India and numerics for China, and then we used to knit them back together and deliver them to our customer. So we could receive a document in the mail and get it back into the customer system within 4 hours of receipt. That's really what we were striving for. And then we started scanning, and then that exploded, and then in 2004 we were approached by a very forward-thinking company called Bottom Line Technologies that heard about us and wanted to acquire our business purely on the basis that it gave them a competitive advantage, so they can sell their solutions as well as services as their entire package to their customers. And so that's how HMSL moved itself onto Bottom Line Technologies, where I worked with them for a couple of years to actually embed the solution truly globally. So we had customers in Seattle, a famous travel firm in Seattle, was sending, millions of documents through our channel, so they would be captured and responded back to them, purely on the basis because we were listening to what they wanted.
And I'm going to touch on the listening thing again, because I think it's an interesting topic and an interesting thread when I've talked to you about value. Why do you see that a problem with some of the current companies that you're advising and working with, and what are some of the issues you see when you're sort of advising people who are not playing that real close customer listening game?
Well, I think it's a challenge for a lot of the startups today, whereas they have a vision, and the vision stays inside their head as the entrepreneur, and they become very, very single-minded and seem to forget how to listen to actually what the customer needs. In other words, they're just selling stuff as opposed to listening and understanding what the customer requires. And I think that's a critical part of the forest. And And the business that I've invested in are in individuals who actually do have this ability to communicate and listen.
Interesting.
And so a business that I invested in was somewhat similar to the HMSL business, a company called Check and Invoice, doing something very, very similar to what we were doing in the early days. And that business has grown exponentially because the entrepreneur and the team actually listened to the customer, and that business has grown quite substantially. And during my time at Bottomline, although I'd sold out and they actually paid me in full, which was really quite unusual for an American organization, because I didn't want shares in the new business. I just wanted cash, because I had an idea in my head that was spinning around. I thought, well, I need cash to execute another idea. And they were really, they opened my mind to a wider opportunity in the marketplace, and that was cash flow, right? Whereas originally my role in the accounts payable space was just simply to record documents and make them available and extract data from them. This time it was saying, well, actually, our real problem is not the document side, it's cash. How do we manage our cash? What do we do about our cash? We've got these things called corporate P cards, purchase cards, and it's a line of credit on a credit card, as we all know as consumers. Our problem is not enough of our suppliers accept card, and and all this sort of stuff. So we're not getting the working capital benefits. And I was listening to this very, very fine gentleman who will remain nameless, and he was telling me all the reasons why cash optimization was critical for the growth of a business. And Ramesh, being from your background, you clearly understand that. And so we sat down, and I asked him a number of questions, why, and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, well, he wants to use a credit card to pay his suppliers, like we do today as a normal course of events. But we're talking about in the early 2000s, where corporate credit cards were only used for travel. And I was informed by this gentleman that if he could use his credit card intelligently, he could end up with what's known as off-balance sheet credit. And Ramesh, I'll leave you to explain all that sort of stuff. And so I thought, oh, okay, fine. So I went to speak to PayPal. Would you believe? I heard about those guys, and I thought, well, maybe they could help our customer, in this chat. And PayPal said, oh, we'd love to help. He said, but, the transaction values you're talking about are just too high for our platform to manage. Because we weren't talking about, 25 quid here, 30 quid there, or 100 quid here. We were talking about 30 or 40,000 pounds a transaction. So again, I just said, well, if PayPal can't do it, I might as well have a go. And so that's how that business evolved. And that business called InvoPay started with in the UK, and we found one of the biggest decisions with folks, and no disrespect to decision makers in the UK, they tend to take a long time to make a decision. And of course, with entrepreneurs, we have a short-term cash requirement and need and everything else, and then we find that it's so difficult to get a decision out of everybody. So I thought, well, if I might as well try and socialise this platform elsewhere. And one of our clients in the UK was a very, very, very large government department. I won't name who they are because for confidentiality. And they were processing thousands and thousands of transactions through our platform, because we actually effectively built a business-to-business PayPal. And we found decisions were very difficult. So I actually went out, would you believe, to the Middle East. And I thought, well, they must have cash flow problems like everybody else. But I also know that folks in the Middle East are very direct and make instant decisions, either the yes or no. And so we then expanded, and we managed to persuade the government of Dubai to use our platform to pay its suppliers using their credit card.
It's a compelling story, Sid, and it really strikes me that, you know, you've kind of just gone on this journey where, you know, you have a spark, you have an inspiration, an idea, you verify that in your mind, and then just execute, and then move on. And these have been very different kinds of businesses, right? Which is incredible. So, you know, having exited all of these businesses and done very well, I know there have been ups and downs, but, you know, that's life, right? But having achieved what you've done, you know, you now invest and advise.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, you know, earlier that you have invested in certain businesses, but, you know, how do you approach those investment decisions?
Well, I guess that I'm using my listening skills again, and then I do some research in the marketplace to look to see if indeed the proposition actually makes sense and it can actually deliver the outcomes. I'm not interested in going through, with respect, death by PowerPoint. Right? You know, what I want them to give me is a 5 or 6 page PowerPoint of exactly why. The what and the how is a different story, is why they're doing this stuff. And then I'll go off and research in my own way as to whether the market actually has this demand. And then I sort of try not to put myself exactly in the entrepreneur's shoes, but say, okay, well, how would I execute this? What would it mean? And what questions do I need to ask? And so on and so forth. So I do my research diligently, and then come back and turn down more than I actually invest in, purely on the basis that I think as an investor, you have to do the research beyond the business plan.
Of course.
So you evaluate the value proposition, but you also mentioned earlier you look at the founders as well in terms of their listening ability and them really understanding the problem. So are you doing those two things in parallel when you're doing your research, really understanding the team?
Oh, yeah. I need to understand the team because, you know, if I don't understand the team and the dynamics in the team, because you can often see where there's a minor fractures in the dynamics in any event, and where the weaknesses are, and where the strengths are. So I look at the balance of the whole thing and whether I can have a grown-up conversation with them without offending anybody. You know, and I think that's critically important. And so that's what I tend to do. I often find that, you know, founders make pretty poor CEOs. You know, pretty poor CEOs, and this is with respect to them because they've got this vision, they've got this ability to articulate the vision, and so on. So they're much better off in front of a customer actually articulating the proposition, or indeed listening to the customer, and then have somebody in the back office that has the strength that can actually manage the financial controls. Because as we all know,
how do you marry the two up then, Sid, as an investor? How does that play out?
Because it plays out because I actually I can't say I interrogate the team, but I have a discussion with the team and start to look at where I believe the stars are in the team, and whether the team are actually fully gelled and actually aligned with the founder and all that sort of stuff. Because there will be co-founders and all this sort of stuff. There's always tends to be a leader, but seeing if they gel and if they've actually got the core skills to actually operate the back office, you know, and that's so critically important because a lot of these startups run out of cash very early in the cycle. They run out of cash very, very quickly because the founders going off into their realms of fantasy and doing all this sort of stuff and socializing and exhibitions and everything else, and forget about the actual bedrock is cash flow and cash optimization, ensuring you can deliver, and so on and so forth. And so that's really why the team is critically important. If there's
as an FD, I couldn't agree more with the with the cash flow point, that's a death knell to many a business, isn't it?
I think so, and I think the fact is we've got got a great solution. If you haven't got the fundamentals from a cash perspective in place, and so that you're actually spending wisely, and so on and so forth, then the whole thing collapses. And that's why the businesses that I've invested in, I've invested in the team, right? Because the team is the critical part of the process, because they're delivering. I'm investing in the proposition, but I've done my research on the proposition to see how that gels itself in the marketplace, then how these things come together, and how they and how they gel. And so, businesses like Check and Invoice has done very, very, very well, because the team and the proposition and the founder have actually gelled very, very well. And I give them my 5 pennies worth every time I meet them online. Sometimes I need a size 12 up the jacksie, but that's another story. You might want to edit that one out, but it's true. They just sometimes need a rebalance of thinking. The other business I invested in, CardUp, has done exceptionally well. Very similar to the Inverpay business, but for consumers and small business. That's just been acquired by funding societies. So again, I invested there. I've mentored the founder, who's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And another business I've invested in is Intent AI. That's in Singapore. Again, it's the founder, understanding, looking at the team, gelling the team, and so on and so forth. And the same as another business called Print6 that does orchestration journeys for onboarding the clients for financial services. So again, all of these elements are meaningful in terms of a core delivery and value to the customer, but also in a strange sort of way, they're all interconnected, and I can almost see them becoming a group. So that's where I go, but I haven't articulated that as such, but you know what I'm saying. Just looking at how to get the balance right. And a lot of the entrepreneurs that I do see have got tremendous vision, but no back office and no background, or the team is insufficiently talented to help them deliver the requirement.
So I want to kind of break that down a little bit. You've got a framework that you follow. You've obviously invested in, a number of businesses. If you had to break it down really simply, you've kind of touched on them, but just as a little package of bullet points to founders, I think this would be really helpful. As an investor, what does an investable business look like to you?
That's an interesting question. It's also a difficult question to answer, because some of it's a bit of gut feel. But I think it's critical for an investor to actually research the market that they're potentially going to be investing in, and not rely on the founders to give them all the information. So that's what I've always done, is say, okay, fine, I like the idea, but is there a market? Let me go and research to see what the scale of that market really does look like, and what's the type of conversations that need to be had in that market to gain success. So, and just to invest on a set of a PowerPoint and a few, financials is just insufficient for me. I need to establish whether the market does truly exist for the solution that the founders are presenting to me.
Okay, so it's kind of a clear-eyed solution to a problem that exists. The market has to exist based on your independent research, and you discover and have a look at the team and make sure that you're comfortable it has the right skill set to execute the vision.
Absolutely right, Ramesh. But I think it's critical from an investor's point of view is to do the research in the market, right? To go out there and have a conversation, have a natter, probe the market, test it out, make sure that the opportunity does exist.
Can I ask, what do you do to research these markets? Because sometimes the market might not even exist.
Indeed. But what I do is I look at what the potential target market is going to be. Then I'll do some research and find out some people that maybe I know in those particular markets, and then I go and have a conversation with them.
Okay, so it's utilizing your network. Yeah,
utilize the network and a bit of sus, a bit of nous, and LinkedIn is a fantastic platform with lots and lots of folks on the platform. But I think it's become more of a social media type platform than an actual business to business platform that I think it was intended to be. But there are some really interesting folks on LinkedIn that you can connect with and have a grown-up conversation with. And so not only is my own network, I then use subsequent networks. I also, bank with a private bank, and I then use the bank's networks as well. So to try and percolate out and see where the opportunity is and who I can have a conversation with. Because not everybody I talk to, I know, right? So I have to do the research, and money is very, very hard to earn, and it's very easy to spend. So if you do, right? I know that because I collect watches, so do me a favor. So I want to do the research. I want to be sure, and not every decision I make is a good one. I've had some failures as well, and but that's purely because of the execution, not because of the market.
Interesting. And when you do your research, Sid, is it intuition and network and conversations, or are you the kind of person who gets some structure to it, writes it down, builds a kind of your own view of the value proposition in your own way? How do you do it as a person?
I do a combination of both.
Okay.
I write things down. I look at it from a linear perspective. I do, my own little charts and things like that, and then I'll percolate into the network, my network, and see if there's the right folks to speak to. And one of the things that's been very useful to me, I've been part of I do a lot of presentations to the financial shared services market. So I can then go and talk to in-process folks that I know. I also talk to CFOs and CEOs of these large market organizations to get their perspective. And so there's a really mix of contacts that I use to actually give me what I believe is the right sort of feedback so I can make the ultimate decision.
And is there a team wrapped around you, Sid, as your business, or as you've evolved? Have you had people who you work with who've done the finance side, and have you built a team over time that's sort of your trusted network to support these things?
I've got a trusted network, but the most important member of my team is my wife. She's got a great deal of sus, and I just have a natter with her and give her some indication of my ideas, and then she'll test me diligently, and so we then end up with a basis where we always agree on the next step forward. We never agree to disagree, because that just becomes a bit fractious. We agree, and then that's the basis of the next part of the decisioning process. So
it's obviously a process that works. Yeah.
Well, it works in the majority, but as I say, I've skinned my knees on a few deals as well. So that's.
And you said it was. And you said delivery was the problem in there. You said the value proposition was good, the market opportunity was there, but is that linked to the team or just the wrong timings? Or
I think probably a combination of both, Mike. I think I think one of the challenges with startups that teams have to demonstrate resilience,
Yeah, okay.
Because it's a tough
That
gig.
volatility thing.
Yeah, and not everybody can actually step up, because they may have other issues that are causing them some concern. So, it really is. That's why the balance in the team has to be critical. There's going to be some strength and some weakness, and there's some guiding principles that sit in between those elements, and that's why the team is absolutely critical. And you often find with startups that the original team seems to fracture, and one or two tend to go their own ways. And that's purely personality issues and all sorts of other things that may be a factor. So you need to keep a very, very close eye on that and make sure that the balance and that's why I attend board meetings, and that's why I attend sometimes management meetings, just to try and get an indication of where I see the potential challenges and issues are. You just can't invest and then just walk away and just hope the sun's going to shine every day.
So you get a sense of the cohesion of the team on an ongoing basis.
You have to. You can't ignore that, because if you ignore that, and there's some fractures underneath the table as opposed to on top of the table, then challenges will arise, and it's how I, as an investor, can help them with those challenges.
Brilliant.
And
so, sorry, Mike, I've cut you off a few times. You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we're seeing more and more a trend of part-time entrepreneurs and things like that who are fully committed, but able to work it around work-life balance, other jobs, because the market's much more flexible to that nowadays. Does that concern you, given what you've just said? And what's your experience or thoughts on the kind of commitment versus part-time versus a different type of entrepreneurial model that's open there in the market, where people can do fractional models and things like that?
Well, I think that all models are open. It's just how from my perspective, if I believe that the founder can actually balance things off correctly. I mean, I appreciate that family commitments are real, because the sense of family, as far as I'm concerned, is number one, right? There's no doubt about that. And of course, you have to be mindful that entrepreneurs have families, some that have, children and so on and so, and you have to accept that maybe there's times when they can't commit totally to the project. And so that's where I'll come in and say, well, do you want me to step in and do this little bit of stuff and help you out? Or is there anybody else in the team that we can bring forward and then perhaps provide them with some grounding and some background to help them, stabilize the situation while you're addressing something at home.
Comes back to team again, right? The right team who are able to help when people are having a bad day or a good day or a busy day or whatever it looks like.
It's total team, and the investors need to understand they're investing not only in the business, they're investing in the team, and helping the team understand what they really do need to do and how much commitment they really need to make. And not everybody in the team truly understands that until they start, getting their shoulder to the wheel and pushing with everybody else. But it's humanistic. That's what it is. Everybody's got their own emotion and fears, and everybody likes to say yes because they want everybody to feel good. But the stark reality is the honesty is 110% absolutely required. If they can't manage it, they should declare.
Sid, obviously, you're kind of attending these meetings with these businesses that you've invested in, getting a sense of the management team, how they're progressing, and also, giving them some good advice. I'm absolutely certain of that. But you do have instances, particularly with certain types of potentially bigger investors, where they can be seen to be interfering too much in the the running of the business. What's your sense of that? And have you experienced that? Do you have a view?
Well, personally, I try not to over interfere. I'm there as for guidance and for a listing post and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into the day-to-day operations, and I know that some fellow investors want to know the ins and outs of whatever, and I think that becomes an interference challenge, because they're not able, the founders and the team aren't able to focus on what they're meant to be doing. It's because all they're trying to do is appease investors all the time, right? And it's a challenge. I mean, investors work very, very hard for their money, and they want to be sure the money is actually working hard enough to give them the return. But investor interference is one of the biggest Achilles heels of new businesses in their growth cycle. They're there to help and coach and advise, but not to interfere.
So it's at the behest of the founder, obviously, to put forward the vision, show the opportunity, demonstrate that in the right way to get the investor interested and to get them across the line, but also to find the right investor.
Yeah, I think finding the right investor is critically important, but also to have the rules and the rules of the game explicit, so everybody understands, obligations and responsibilities and so on and so forth. And I think that's a critical part of the forest. Some investors that I do know just can't help themselves but want to interfere. Right? They want to know the ins and outs, and I think it becomes a lot of unnecessary noise and interference, and it takes the founder and the team's eye off the ball, because all they're trying to do is appease somebody. So I think that investors need to be realistic and humanistic and say, okay, I'm here to help if you need me. Call me when you want, if you need a bit of, if you want a little chat, and if you want me to go and visit a customer with you to show support, happy to do so.
I've definitely been, through that experience as a finance director, where, myself and my team and the wider team, in fact, have been working on investor reporting to such extent that it was like, gosh, we actually want to be focusing on growing the business. This is the right balance has to be struck, right? Mike, have you experienced anything?
Yeah, I've had a similar experience where boards have started to put pressure on the team, and it starts to fragment, and you start to see actually bad behaviours occurring, where maybe they start to prepare briefings for the board rather than be the real business. And I think your point, Sid, around rules of the game on what is how to collaborate, because the truth is, as you know, there's cycles in businesses, and you have bad days, and it's how the teams collectively with investors manage those difficult times is the real test of this working. And I've seen boards really work well together and actually get through those problems, and they're stronger for it. And I've seen others where they fragment and it becomes a personality problem and they start to deviate the messaging.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that true collaboration and true partnership, and everybody buying into the vision and the outcome. And of course, if they do trip up a little bit, they're there to help, not to hinder. It's not, it seems to me that, from an entrepreneur's perspective, they need to be sure they choose the right investor that gels with their vision, that actually adds value beyond cash, that can provide the guidance in an unemotional way, because business is not about emotion, it's about actuals and fact and what needs to be done. And if an investor takes it too personally, they become an interference and a lot of noise, which is fundamentally unnecessary, because the entrepreneur just cannot get on with the job.
And in your example, Romesh, did it impact the business you were running by the fact that you were doing all the reporting, you were feeling the pressure, or how did that play out?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of staff turnover, in that scenario, and I think you have to, as I said, get the balance right, because investors quite rightly need to understand what's going on in the business, and I would rather focus on driving the business forwards, measuring against that, and having transparency, but not kind of spend the majority of my time as a finance director just focusing on ticking boxes, if that makes sense. If it's meaningful information, absolutely. My view is that management information should always be about measuring against goals, targets, performance, and identifying opportunities and weaknesses which can be solved and exploited respectively.
Yeah, and it's about the teamwork to do that. And I think that being able to recognise where the strengths and weaknesses are within the team. And I appreciate that from a finance director's perspective, there's a huge obligation on them and on their shoulders. And it's how they manage their input to the team in words that the team can actually understand. And that's a critical part. So the tone of voice and the articulation is very, very clear. The fact that you've got a big VAT quarter coming up and cash flow is down the Swanee a bit. What do we need to do collectively? We as the team collectively to actually boost cash flow, right? Can we all get on the phone and ask our customers to perhaps accelerate the payments a little bit, and all that sort of stuff, and use your relationships in the most intelligent, rather than chucking it on the finance team and leaving the finance team to pick up and run with the ball, which they may not necessarily be able to do so. So personal relationships with the customer is a critical part of the forest, and if you're short of cash, there's and you can perhaps have a word with one or two of your customers to accelerate a payment. Why wouldn't you?
I think it's beholden on the CFO to speak truth.
Yes,
the board.
Totally.
Yeah. Where there are red flags, they need to be discussed. They need to be dealt with. There's no point hiding under a rock or letting other members of the senior leadership team hide behind a smokescreen of expectation and bluster, when actually the numbers are telling you something that is worrying, or it's got to be dealt with, I think, and that's the way that a good CFO, I believe, should deal with that scenario.
Yeah, but also it's incumbent on the founder to actually understand what a balance sheet looks like, and what the elements of the balance sheet are, and what this truly means, and cash flow projections, what that truly means, and revenue projections, and the whole 9 yards. And unless the founder understands the financial pillars that are fundamentally necessary to keep the business going, they're going to go off into their realms of fantasy and keep spend, because that's the way they think they need to do it, rather than saying, actually, I need to pivot my thinking and focus on one of these two elements that are critically important for the survival of the business.
I think we talked about financing of operations too, and maturity of the product, what you can really give customers, when the customers will really get your vision. The product market fit is always a really big problem, and well articulate founders can articulate a vision, but you might not be delivering that for a significant period of time, and how you manage the expectations and build the relationships within that, and the reality of it is so important. And
also managing the dev team as well.
Yeah, and software world.
That's a really tough gig, because they speak their own unique language and may not have the type of disciplines that one would expect, right? Yeah. And so ensuring that the qualitative nature and the quantitative nature of the development process is critically monitored, and so that we can test things out and ensure that we're actually building stuff that the customer actually wants, rather than what the dev team would like to go off in the realms of fantasy and build. And
Really
That's such a good point. Yeah.
That's really good.
yeah, I mean, because it's, you've got the sales on one side, but then you've got the finance in the middle, and then you've got the dev team, and the dev team needs to understand what their obligations are. Right.
Amazing. Sid, we've really touched on some broad subject topic areas. I'm picking up, listening is the one I'm picking up really interestingly, but actually we've spent a lot of time on team. And if I think about what we're talking about around finance, operations, devs, and your wife, it's all about the kind of people around you who advise you and keep you on that straight and narrow. And I think that's, for me, the most interesting insight here. But is there anything else you think that perhaps we haven't pulled out, or maybe I haven't summarized well, that is sort of people should think about, given you've had such a successful career?
Well, I mean, I think it's about, there's no I in team, right? It's about the team. It's about the team understanding and buying into what they're delivering. Right? And collectively, and there's no point in going off on tangents and doing this, that, and the other without the team having full knowledge of where you're going on what the journey. I like the J word, or everyone talks about the J word, but what the journey looks
sorry.
like. No, don't worry. But I think it's critically important the language is right. Everybody understands where they're going. Right?
Yeah.
And if we all have to turn left rather than turn right, the team has to understand they have to turn left. Right, and the reasons behind that, and I think that what tends to happen as soon as a lot of financial pressure, the team tends to fragment a bit. So it's the ability to keep that team cohesive, keep it together, keep that sense of team driving forward, and that's really where it's at as far as I'm concerned.
It's team. What about you, Ramesh? What's your reflections?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, thank you so much, Sid. It's been really wonderful hearing about your story, from all those years ago, how you've built up these businesses. The team aspect, 100%, I think you've articulated that really well. It's been quite a good discussion. I've also taken away from this the research, the due diligence that needs to be done to ensure that there is a market out there, a viable market, for your product or service. So, back up the wonderful concept with as much information and facts as you can. I think that's a strong takeaway, because so much can be lost if that isn't done effectively. So, brilliant. In fact, it's been packed full of insights. So hopefully our listeners will gain a lot from your thoughts. I think we'll wrap up there. So thank you so much again. We'd like to thank everyone very much for listening or watching. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we have. Strive and Thrive is a regular series of discussions for entrepreneurs and business leaders, and we have lots of interesting guests to share their insights and stories with you. Big thank you again, Sid. Big thank you to Mike and the rest of the Strive and Thrive team. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.